Welcome to Toby's Student Expert Podcast. On this platform, Toby will engage with student experts, their field of study, passions and interests. My name is Ollie Genbash. My field of study is politics and philosophy. My expertise is the field of resistance, mysticism, and particularly stand-up comedy and psychedelic experiences.
Welcome to the Arts Performed podcast. This episode was recorded under the former title Student Expert Podcast. Please enjoy.
Why shouldn't we trust our perceptions? Why should we seek to change our state of consciousness, or why should we be in flux?
I think it's a natural drive to want to change our consciousness. I think there does just seem to be something natural about altering our consciousness, whether historically it was just doing it for enjoyment purposes, doing something different, or a whole load of reasons. When people talk about shamanism and stuff, really that's kind of to do with sort of war, putting curses on other shamans, sending interdimensional darts, using these tools for kind of not necessarily positive means, using them for going to war. People would eat psychedelics and hunt, things like this.
But those things, I know they kind of didn't have a individualistic kind of direction to what they were doing, but things like trying to send darts out to your enemy and trying to put evil curses on another shaman, I see that as kind of, that's a natural progression from doing that to controlling kind of large populations.
Yeah.
How do you see shamanism in the modern sense? So do you know? I'm assuming you know shamans, or are you a shaman?
I would never call myself a shaman, and I don't. No, I don't know anyone that would consider themselves a shaman either. I think it's a tricky one. Really, when you look at it historically, the etymology of the word shaman just refers to the Sami people in Siberia that take mushrooms.
It's not one individual within a
So shaman,
community.
the word is descended from Siberia, and it, historically, anthropologically refers to a particular type of people who took the fly agaric mushroom.
But is that
And
a
now it's
community
kind of
or individuals?
That would be so the shaman would be an individual in that community, but now it's been extrapolated to anyone who uses psychedelics. And also the interesting thing, a lot of people I speak to say, the shaman would be the one that would take the psychedelic. It's not the people it's not the person who needs healing. The shaman takes the psychedelic so they can see what's wrong with the person, and then fix them. And now in the modern world, shamanism means you're having an experience with someone who's leading a ceremony, and you've taken a substance. And I think it's difficult because, as I was kind of mentioning before, it's like not everyone, but a lot of people want this kind of song and dance of the shaman. It's kind of like exotic, for lack of a better word.
Yeah,
You know, and that's me kind of with my cynical hat on. But I think a lot of people get blindsided by it, and they're like, they want to have this shaman, but it's like they don't really know what a shaman is or what they're meant to do. You know, it's like the shaman's always sort of the person who's on the fringes of society, always seen as a bit weird and kind of like, well, you know. Whereas now it's like, I don't know.
Can I go from there? Since starting this blog, I bumped into, I think I mentioned it before the recording, I bumped into a guy calls himself Tommy Poppers, and as I said, he wrote a play and an album about his life experiences, and he dresses up in what he calls sailor drag.
Okay. Yeah.
And listening to his music, and there's a couple of videos, and also seeing the play, I've got this idea that there are certain people within society that, for whatever reason, they have the capabilities of shattering perception or changing perception. So when this guy's prancing around in sailor drag, his performance was very kind of tumultuous. So it was going from very humorous to very sinister to very painful and venting and almost losing control. I see him and people like him performing that function in today's society.
I mean,
so on the fringes of society, and also people like Genesis P-Origin and other artists as well.
I don't know if necessarily the shaman, in a kind of traditional sense, is there to shatter illusions, because I'm not.
They have access to a different reality.
Yeah, but I think possibly in the traditional society, you know, if you're a member of the village, of the tribe, you're going to see a shaman, you're not necessarily having anything shattered, because there's not anything different to be shattered, you know. If you're talking about the jaguar spirit or the snake in ayahuasca, it's not these otherworldly things. These are things that are part of the tradition, and you know, the kids are brought up believing.
I suppose what I mean by kind of shattering reality is that obviously back then they would have had a kind of different perception of what their lives were. So they would be part of a village as opposed to individuals. We have a very kind of very particular way of living and engaging and consuming. What I mean by shattering reality is that people like that in modern society are shattering reality. It's not to do with the reality not being good enough. It's to do with the reality not being relevant for us.
I mean, to be cynical, I think there is a lot of that. The reality is not good enough. I think possibly kind of like the increase in, you know, conspiracy theorists thinking we're all controlled by lizards and all these people is because people are, a lot of the time, they're quite unhappy. They're quite bored with going to their jobs. It's useful to believe that, like, it's irrelevant and we're these spiritual beings, and, you know, this stuff isn't meant for us, because it's just so boring. It's kind of difficult to wrap our heads around. Well, how have we, you know, suddenly got to the point where we are in this globalized world where everything's geared towards production? I don't think that's sort of opinion, really. It's kind of how the world is. The majority of the world kind of works 40-hour working week. I don't want to say it's like a get out to think we're kind of these spiritual beings. But it is like a way to kind of deflect, possibly admitting just that, yeah, this reality isn't actually that good for a lot of people. It is quite difficult. A lot of people are struggling. I worry whether it's like, well, is it kind of spilling into kind of Christian Zen time rhetoric, where it's almost like, well, we're going to a better place, so don't worry about this life kind of thing. You know,
So
could
what
people
is
be
it?
spending too much time in the psychedelic world and just kind of, well, this whole reality is bullshit, so kind of don't pay any attention to it. When actually we might need to pay attention to it, because it might all be very real, and it might possibly be the only reality that we've got, and it might just be really dull and boring, and we need to actually like work towards getting ourselves out of this.
There's something that I've been thinking of myself, that particularly in terms of ideas of psychedelia and crossing from one reality to another, and kind of seeing this as this is not real and this is not real and our relationships are not real. But in a material sense, whatever this thing is, this pen that I call my pen that I'm holding in my hands, whatever it is in reality, the way that I understand it as an orange pen, that's how I'm interpreting it. And that's my relationship with it.
Yeah. And sort of everything else is irrelevant.
Yeah. I mean, why?
I mean,
is
it's like the whole, you know. I mean, I'm always kind of going through this in my head, and I need to kind of stop thinking about it. But like the whole concept in like quantum physics, where nothing's ever actually touching. If you look at things on a quantum level, nothing's touching. It's just, you know, my hand stopping my finger going through my hand is the positive charge on the electrons. But it's just messages, it's just signals, there's no actual physical. But it's kind of pointless and irrelevant thinking like that, because I don't live in the quantum world. I live in this world where I experience things on this level.
What's this? So if nothing's ever actually touching, what happens if I fall over and hit my head on the ground and I start bleeding? So my skin's broken. So what's happened there?
That's signals, that's information, it's data.
But did my head not touch the ground? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, but and certainly on the macro level, on the, you know, it's you have fallen over and hit your head on the ground, and that has really happened. I mean, that's possibly why sort of quantum physics is a bit irrelevant. You know, if I stepped out in front of a car, but I was able to like align all of my atoms with the atoms of the car, so that all of the atoms completely missed each other, then wouldn't actually get hit by the car. But it's like, but that's, it's just sort of irrelevant thinking, sort of going down these rabbit holes.
So philosophical, is it Confucius that said, am I a butterfly thinking I'm a
That's
man or a man?
Chang Tzu, the Taoist philosopher. So he had a dream.
Oh, Lao Tzu.
Chang Tzu.
Oh, was it Chang? Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay,
So there's Lao Tzu, whether it was a person or just, you know, a collection of stuff. So Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching, which is like the more kind of political, mystical side of more kind of I don't know, not doctrine, but more laying things out about Taoism. Whereas the Changzu is a lot to do with nature and like the symbiosis of different things, lots of different stories to kind of highlight the workings of the universe and things like that. So yeah, he came up with the thing, you know, was I a butterfly dream when I was Changzu, or Changzu dream when I was a butterfly?
Do you know much about kind of Eastern?
I know a fair bit about Taoism. I was sort of like kind of half practicing Taoist for a little bit, which I just found fascinating, because it's this sort of paradoxical thing, which is like it's like an emphasis on not emphasizing, in a way. It's like this trying really hard to not try hard, I think. Not putting energy into a situation that like doesn't require it. I've really kind of got obsessed with the whole concept of yin and yang, and went through the experience of it, very much so.
Went through the experience.
Yeah, just energetically wise, life wise. So I ended up having acupuncture on the NHS, and that sparked my whole interest into Taoism, and I started getting interested in Chinese medicine and Kung Fu. But the acupuncturist actually said, like, you will sort of crash a bit after this, and then it will kind of rebuild you. And I was like, right, so it is like working like the yin and yang. If you have too much of one thing, it will spill into the other. So I went from being really down to bringing myself up, and being really energetic and doing loads of Kung Fu, and then the Kung Fu I was doing actually was a bit kind of too energetic and a bit too violent, and then I ended up injuring myself, and then I went back down into that trough, and then it's been sort of kind of up and down, but I think it's yeah, again, this kind of idea of flux, and knowing you've got to kind of have balance.
From what I understand, the idea of Taoism is that you live with the way, so you don't. It's hard to kind of get my head around it, having not been brought up in that kind of philosophy.
There's a good. I think one of the best. I think it's in the Ching, but it's like. Like talking about how it's better to be like a stream, carefully eroding away at the rocks, making its path through, rather than a wave trying to crash.
So it's not about not smash. Acting; it's about acting in the way that your obstacles allow you to.
Yeah.
So as opposed to demolishing this house and rebuilding it, it's kind of living within the means. And if it needs repairing, repair it. If it doesn't need repairing, don't repair it.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
I mean, there's a lot to do in Taoism with kind of conserving energy, living sort of minimally.
So you're not engaged with Taoism anymore?
I mean, I still practice. I still do Tai Chi every morning. I use these Chinese medicine balls every morning, which sit in the palm of your hand, and you spin them around your hands, and the 5 fingers are connected to your organs. It's to do with blood flow, but it's also meant to replicate the yin and the yang. So have these 2 balls following each other. Also meant to replicate the planets, orbit, and it still sticks with me. It's kind of something that I can't really get away from it. I guess because it's more of like this cosmology. I see it rather than a religion, or even a philosophy. It's more this engaging with the universe in a very practical sense.
It makes a lot of sense to me. I've read through it a couple of times, and I need to engage with it a bit more, but it is about sort of, for me it's about kind of knowing when to act and how to act. Never done Kung Fu, but I imagine that, because what I've heard from other people, it's not about how much power you have, it's how you use the power.
Yeah, and it's like in the right moment, and like sort of using your opponent's energy against them, so you don't have to exert yourself. So I found really interesting, and you're even like physically doing the shapes of the yin and yang. And it is, it's all about sort of knowing when to act, knowing how much energy to put into a situation. But it kind of requires training, and I think, you know, it's this paradoxical thing, this sort of engagement with passivity. You know, we have to be able to train our minds to be passive. And it's sort of a difficult one, because it is, you know, slightly contradictory, but I think when we, you know, do live these lives where we feel like we have to fill our minds with stuff all the time, and we have to constantly be having a conversation with people, we have to constantly be doing something, we constantly have to have an opinion on something, it's very difficult to even conceptualize, like, I mean, I find that particularly with something like LSD, the kind of peak experience, where there really isn't actually anything going on in my head, I find that is kind of particularly...
What you just said there sounds almost contradictory to being in a state of flux.
Do you think so?
Sounds like it to me. I mean, can you explain that?
It's this idea...
Because I can kind of get you that you're connecting the ideas of kind of the philosophical ideas of the Tao and martial arts to empty your mind and that type of meditation. But then earlier on you were saying about certain states of consciousness, keeping your consciousness in a state of flux. How do those two kind of sit with each other?
I mean, I don't really see them to be that much different. I think it's just something possibly like Hindu mantras are more directive in keeping you in a state of flux, keeping your consciousness in a state of flux, whereas like the Taoism provides you with the tools to prepare you. But I think it's like the Taoism is sort of like a stepping back, and it's concepts in Kung Fu of like taking what comes, following what leaves, but always like remaining in this state of complete and total awareness and preparedness. Whereas something like the mantras are probably taking you somewhere and kind of putting you into a state of flux, rather than you having the tools to kind of sit back and like be the flux in a way. I think that's what the Taoism gets at, is you are, as much as the Tao is the Tao, you are the Tao, everything is, you are the flux, you are the rivers, the wind, the animals, the sounds of the birds, everything kind of moving, you are that. So I think something like a mantra is like hardware upgrade kind of thing.
How I understand it is that mantras or psychoactive drugs keep your consciousness in a flux, whereas the kind of meditative or philosophical ideas of Kung Fu or Taoism or even Buddhism strips us from our reality and brings us to ourselves. So they both approaches are kind of to bring us to this moment, being active in literally the moment, and that's kind of what I get from Hindu philosophy, like the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah,
it's all about stripping you away from attachments to desire and identity and
I mean, I think there's always this awareness that maintains. You can strip back and strip back and strip back and infinitely, but you will always have this awareness that maintains, and I think sort of honing that and really understanding that. For me, that's what these kind of meditative practices are about. Kind of really coming to point of trying to understand what we are is me and my story, or am I just this awareness? Am I this consciousness that is, part of the one big massive consciousness? That is an evil fox noise.
That's what the fox says.
Yeah.
Do you use substances and meditation together?
Yeah. Not necessarily the way round of I will meditate with psychedelics, but it will be I will take psychedelics and then get to the point where I will meditate. So it will.
So you wait for the moment to happen?
It's not necessarily waiting for the moment. It's just that. I quite like to journey on my own, and it will just get to a point where I will just have to sit and meditate, or listen to mantras.
So you see when you take substances, you see it as a journey, or you experience it as a journey.
Yeah, very much so. Very much like.
Can you describe?
Generically, just like it's like a. There's like a story going on. It's like an episode of something.
Is it? I'm being reminded of Ithaca.
Okay.
Ithaca.
No.
It's Ithaca is from Odysseus.
Okay.
And Ithaca is the island that he's travelling to. And there's a poem by Constantine Cavafy, and he talks about Ithaca is the destination, but the destination is not important. It's the journey that's important.
I mean, that's a very sort of Taoist concept as well. It is this journey. It's not necessarily that point that you get to and you can go, okay, yeah, I figured it all out.
So is there an answer?
No.
Or is there a question?
Well, yeah, what is the question really? But I think I kind of come to this conclusion, and I feel quite comfortable in it, that it would be absolutely preposterous to find an answer. It would be the end of everything. The whole reason for there not being an answer, for me again, kind of coming back to the cosmology, we're made of all the same stuff that the stars are made out of, the planets are made out of. It's all this one thing. So I sometimes think, well, I mean, what if it is all the universe just creating these individual consciousnesses to experiencing itself?
It continually surprises me that people like Ollie can engage in the use of psychedelics and other aspects of life in such a deep and meaningful way, as opposed to my suspicion that people that engage in that just do it to get high. He's definitely proved me wrong on that. I love the way he went deeper into mysticism, and especially in terms of breaking out of our conventions, having our consciousness in flux. I think he's onto something there, definitely. And next week's episode we'll go further into it. I will leave you with some final thoughts from Ollie, with one question I posed to him that will be answered next week.
So do you have ideas of, I don't want to say creation myths, are there stories that mean anything to you, or is your experience simply kind of substances, meditation, philosophy?
I mean, I was brought up in a Jewish household, but we were never kind of really that religious. So things like the kind of creation story was never really sort of wasn't really ever something that was kind of talked about in my family. My dad is quite an atheist, really. But
are you an atheist?
no, and it's sort of.
So do you believe in God?
It's a difficult one. I mean, as I said, you know, I think the universe is conscious. I think it is this whole thing experiencing itself. I mean, yeah.
Can I pose something to you?